This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the 5th week of January 2014. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio, and it's UFC 169 Fight Week just across the river in Newark, New Jersey, and that means we could do a special edition of the MMA Beat. Typically, we're not able to do the shows on UFC Fight Week, but since it's right here, look at this. The band is back together. We've got Luke Thomas of MMAfighting.com and the Sirius XM Fight Club, Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com, and the man with the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com.
Feels so taboo to be in New York talking about MMA.
I know. Look at us. Devils. Rebels, I should say.
Yeah, let's not go that far.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys, let's talk about UFC 169. Of course, on Thursday, they had the media day, and in my opinion, the big news coming out of the media day was Jose Aldo saying that he wanted to go up to 155. He would relinquish his 145-pound title, and Dana White is down with this idea as well. Of course, Josh Thompson losing last Saturday opened the door for this possibility. Aldo versus Pettis, maybe we'll finally see it. And we should say it is somewhat insulting to one Ricardo Lamas to talk about this before the fight happens, but would you be okay with this? Jose Aldo, who's been so dominant, just vacating the title and going for a new belt at 155.
Provided he gets past Lamas, I hardly see what the problem could be, right? I mean, first of all, they were supposed to have already fought in different circumstances, obviously, but I just mean there was a belief coming out of the WEC that when Jose Aldo got to the UFC and really got on the big shows and the pay-per-views and could have the UFC muscle behind him, he was going to be a breakout star. Obviously some concerns about the language barriers and things like that. And certainly he's done well for himself, but that hasn't quite happened. Even when he fought Frank Yeager and that dropped down, he dropped a weight class, that pay-per-view didn't do amazing. He hasn't quite turned the corner as a star. And one wonders if that can change if he goes up a weight class that, first of all, they're bigger. I mean, slightly bigger, but They are bigger. It's a more notable division. Featherweight is still something of a novelty act is unfair, but relative to more established divisions, it's not quite there. And you would have to think that that matchup in particular would be something either guy could look back on their career as a defining moment, both as a resume builder and as something that was promotionally really, there's some stuff that has the raw material of promotional greatness. That is it. How big? I don't think a million pay-per-view buys, but certainly very substantial.
But does it taint the title in some way if he vacates it and then, the next guy? We're dealing with this somewhat at 170 with GSP and Johnny Hendricks, but a lot of people think Hendricks won the fight, so I don't think they have a big issue with it. But if Aldo wins dominantly on Saturday and then moves up, the next guy, let's say it's Chad Mendes or Cub Swanson, who, by the way, lost to Jose Aldo in the past, it doesn't quite feel like they're the king of 145. You know what I'm saying?
It's true, but if he moves out of the division, he's no longer there, and it's just a natural progression of things. It's a division that he can move to naturally. It wouldn't be a stretch, and maybe the king of 145 becomes the guy who's now the king at 135.
Yes, it creates a domino effect, right? Because Renan Barão has always said he doesn't want to fight at 145 alongside Jose Aldo.
It's just the UFC's way of keeping Faber in the conversation. Should he lose?
Wow, now it all makes sense. But it does create some problems for them, because then you could have two vacated titles.
Right.
But two vacated titles with what? Much bigger opportunities for guys who are excellent fighters and not really great salespeople.
Sure.
If you can turn them into great fighters and great salespeople, okay, maybe your bantamweight title doesn't mean as much as your light heavyweight title. Who cares? You're finally giving these guys, frankly, the attention they deserve. Jose Aldo and Renan Barão, if we're going to say Renan Barão's in the conversation too, are credits to combat athletes everywhere. That is basically as good as you can get, no matter what. They should be able to, by promotional push and by their own circumstances, be bigger stars. Maybe this is a step in the right direction.
And in the end, is it really about the various belts that are on the line? It's really about putting together the best fights, at least in my opinion. That's what's most important. At the end of the day, I want to see this guy and that guy. They're the two best guys. Well, let's put them in there. And if it just so happens that then we have to then scramble to get someone to fill the vacancy, the vacuum that is created, well, it just gives an opportunity for somebody else who doesn't have an opportunity.
I'm a little surprised. I was a little surprised when he said he'd give him the green light, because when you really take a look at it, entering the first half of 2014, there just aren't that many belts going to be waged over it. So it's one of those situations where then you're going to take one guy who has a belt against another guy who has a belt, and sort of eliminate a little, another title chance for somebody else in there somewhere, which becomes a little weird. So I was surprised at how eager Dana White was yesterday to basically say that. But at the same time, I really wanted to see that fight when it was supposed to happen in August. I wanted to see what Pettis and Aldo would look like, just given the fact, their styles. We saw what Pettis, he's pretty well-rounded guy and explosive. I just thought that would be the fight to make at some point anyway. So personally, you want to see it, but I am a little surprised that Dana's behind it. And the other thing is we don't know when Pettis will actually be back. So we could be, Aldo, if he does get by Ricardo Lamas, might still be fighting another featherweight fight just because he has to, or he might, or either that or you'd have to fight somebody in the lightweight that's not Pettis if he was going to move up.
I was just going to say one thing real quick about who he's going to fight at featherweight. There's a way to debate GSP versus Silva, their resumes. Silva changed divisions, 3 different divisions, 167 all the way up to 205. Fought a top 5 guy, beat a top 5 guy in all 3 divisions. That's one way to look at it. Of course, the unbeaten streak as well. GSP's resume is a little bit different. He had 3 generations of welterweights that he dominated. Aldo has basically dominated his current generation, and with all due respect to Conor McGregor, the second generation hasn't really asserted itself. If he fights another featherweight, it's somebody who's not, I'm sure they're gonna be good fighters. It's not somebody you're like, ooh, that's an interesting twist. The twist is at lightweight.
Right. It wasn't organic either. There was a lot of people sort of migrating. As soon as 145 was in the UFC, there was a lot of people migrating to go meet him and try to get the chance, thinking they could do that, get a better chance at a title fight. It hasn't felt like that there's been natural 145ers who've sort of made their way at this point, like you might think at this point of his career.
As it stands right now, he truly has cleaned out the division. I mean, to ask him to fight Cub Swanson again or Chad Mendes, he doesn't really need to. So I do agree with that. Typically, I don't like when someone vacates the belt, but I do agree there aren't that many challenges. And the Pettis-Aldo fight, that's a star-making fight. Now, you mentioned something very interesting about Barao and Aldo. They're such great athletes, but they're not draws. I mean, they really have to be together on a card to really try to sell it. Right now, you look at the UFC situation. Let's say Lamas wins. He's not the most outspoken, colorful guy. If Uriah Faber wins, is that better for the UFC's business going into 2014 to have guys who, let's be honest, who can speak English, who can open up some doors, Lamas in the Latino market, Uriah, we know about his star power. I mean, they'll never say it, but would it actually be better for the UFC if Lamas and Faber win?
I don't think so. Maybe for Faber, you could maybe cobble a case for that. With a company as global as UFC intends on being, and as sort of Western Hemisphere dominated as they are, Brazil, United States, and Canada are 3 major markets, right? So Brazil's number 2 now, ahead of Canada, by the way.
I don't know.
Well, in terms of TV rights money, they make more in Brazil.
Semantics.
Well, okay, money is not semantics, but
did you see that press conference? I'm kidding.
But you get the idea. Like these are the 3 by far. By far, right? So it makes sense that they can have guys there that can still keep that market moving. I think Jose Aldo, certainly Curry's favor in Brazil. We've seen what happens when he fights down there. He's a little bit more significant of a draw. I don't think losing those guys is great. I also don't think that Ricardo Lamas. Listen, I'm in no position to judge anyone's Latino bona fides, but I do read the MMA Latino media out of Mexico.
Okay.
They don't cover Ricardo Lamas. I mean, they make a passing reference to him. It's not like he's a big deal. Cain Velasquez, on the other hand, is a big deal to them. So he'd be beneficial, but he's just not quite that guy. So Faber might be a little bit different, but losing both, I think, would not be in our interest.
Well, and I don't know that we necessarily would be losing them. I mean, when you see upsets, to me, upsets just stir the pot in a good way. And I'm not talking necessarily about the business, and I know that's where your question was originated, but just from a competitive angle, the idea that say a 5-1 underdog could go out and beat Jose Aldo would be pretty amazing, because then we'd probably see him come back and see if try to get the belt back. Same with Barao and Faber. Now Faber is, the matinee idol, the guy that is so popular, that certainly would have a business spillover as well. But even just competitively, here's a guy that's been losing every time he fights in a championship fight. If he were to get over the hump, that would just elevate him in insurmountable ways. So I like the idea of thinking about upsets. I don't think they're going to happen, but I like the idea of thinking about them.
Imagine if Lamas does win this fight. I mean, you would have situations where you might have Johnny Hendricks as a champion. Maybe Alex Gustafsson at some point is able to, this would be a lot of stars, or not, guys who are not stars upsetting the stars, and guys who probably don't have the most charisma and the selling, in the selling of their being, I guess, a little bit. They're not going to be those transcendent guys. I think you get a little bit, I think it would be detrimental ultimately for the UFC if Ricardo Lamas' fight, if he gets in there and wins it and he becomes one of these guys and everybody starts to do this. For so long, we had guys that everybody recognized their name. Well, people knew who George St. Pierre was who don't follow the fight game. That's probably true of Anderson Silva, Brock Lesnar, even guys like that. I don't feel like any of those guys would have that sort of that sort of transcendence, and ultimately that hurts.
But do you think they need Faber at this point, with a lot of those champions being out? I mean, he is really a popular guy.
He would be the exception because,
Right.
when we are talking anything below lightweight, I still feel like so much of it is Uriah Faber. He does have that star quality. If he was able to get the belt.
Look at him at the
Right,
media day, right? You were
absolutely.
there.
Yeah, he was. Yesterday we saw it. There was right away when they unleashed the scrums. He's the guy who has everybody on him immediately. So I feel like that would be a boon for the UFC ultimately, and it would set up a third fight with Barao or whatever they want to do. They still got Dominic Cruz in the wings. I mean, that would set up a lot of big fights for them.
But as much as all the stuff about being able to promote a fight is really important to the bottom line, the way someone competes inside that octagon is the final test. I mean, and the guys who have become the big stars were as much stars because of how they competed as they were stars for promoting. I mean, look at George St. Pierre is not exactly a guy, he's not the Mr. Charisma either, but huge star because of the way he performed in there. So not to suggest that Ricardo Lamas or even Uriah Faber is going to be that kind of guy. I don't think Faber has that much career left to become that guy. But if you put a guy in there who creates a great upset and then becomes dominant in that division, the people are going to follow, aren't they?
I actually disagree with Jeff a little bit on the upset. Not that it wouldn't be beneficial for Ricardo Lamas. I mean, of course, right? And then Faber as well too. Although maybe in the eyes of casuals, Faber beating Barao is not a upset. I don't know, but certainly by the odds makers it is. But here's what I mean: like if you go back and look at Chris Weidman, he's not particularly charismatic either, but he had something of puff his chest out that just killed Anderson Silva fans. But that was proportional, or at least that flowed towards him because of how popular Anderson Silva was. If Anderson Silva was a quarter as popular as he is, and that's basically what Jose Aldo is, there'd be a quarter of the amount of pushback, which is kind of what you see. In other words, if Lamas does the impossible and beats Aldo, that's great for his career, but it doesn't turn him into a star in the way in which Chris Weidman turned into a star by beating the greatest, and this guy who had a cult of personality around him. So I look forward to seeing what Lamas can do, but we should manage our expectations about what an upset could do for him.
Well, it's not a one-night thing, though. What I'm suggesting is Lamas.
It's a two-night thing for Chris Weidman.
Well, right, but that's because he was in with Anderson Silva. With a guy like Lamas, he would need to produce a series of victories, and if he could do that, I mean, he's already a guy who everybody talks about as well. Nobody really talks about Lamas, but he's beating this guy, and he's beating this guy, and he's beating that guy. But there's this expectation that he's a ceiling right now, and he's reached the ceiling right now. And if he goes through that ceiling, he's got to keep going in order to be a star. I don't think that this would really would do it, would seal a deal, but it certainly would start the ball rolling. Don't you think?
Maybe.
One more thing on those two title fights before we move to the Overeem and Mir fight. You mentioned Brazil and how obviously it's a very strong market, and they're seemingly there every month now, the UFC is. If both Barao and Aldo lose, I know it's a big if, they won't have a Brazilian champion, and it'll be over 5 years since that's been the case. And Alex Davis was on the MMAR, the longtime MMA manager, and he said this is something that he predicted. He doesn't think Brazilian MMA is evolving enough. They need to come to the States, cut weight the right way, train the right way. Will this really hurt that market if they have no guy that they can, hang their hat on? I mean, of course you have the Machitas and the Jacares, but there's no champion there. They need that in that market, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think people get a false sense of enthusiasm because you go to, or at least, hell, you don't even have to go to Brazil. You just listen to the Fox broadcast and you hear that Vai Morrer, right? Or however you say it in Portuguese, I don't know. And you think, oh my God, they're cheering for like ERJ Santos.
Right.
It doesn't matter who it is. No, it matters. I mean, they certainly are. The Brazilians are a dynamic bunch, but they're the way in which their market works and the way in which the fight game works, it's not like that's a separate vacuum independent of the rules of promotion. You need champions. Would Canada be where Canada is if it were not for George St. Pierre? Absolutely not. Stars, yes, independent of winning titles, but guys who transcend their peers is basically what we're talking about. And if you look around, who is a non-title holder who transcends his peers in Brazil? I'm not sure who that would be. Maybe Junior Dos Santos. He's obviously very popular, but there's nobody like a Brock Lesnar kind of figure, relatively speaking anyway. So for me, having that title is something of a proxy and affirms their status as that transcendent figure.
Okay, let's move along. Obviously, there's a lot at stake between Overeem and Mir. And, the talk has been, loser leaves town, all that stuff. But both men are saying that if they lose, they're not going anywhere as far as MMA is concerned. There was a time a couple months ago, Alistair Overeem said, if I can't beat Frank Mir, I should find something else to do. Well, today, I should say Thursday, he took back those words. He said, I'm a fighter, I'm going to keep fighting. Who has more pressure, in your opinion, on his shoulders going into this fight? Because one guy, Frank Mir, has been in this game for a very long time, and one would think he might get that call if he loses badly. All right, we'll give you a gig, the Chuck Liddell special. Overeem will not get that treatment. He could go out and do Glory or maybe Belts or something like that. You just have a hard time wondering who has more pressure, because obviously both of them are going to be in a tough spot, but I wonder if one has more options outside of the UFC than the other.
Well, yeah, the options afterward probably do fall in Overeem's side, but I also think that he's the guy that is is more on the bubble, so to speak. I don't know that. We've heard Dana White say that this is not a loser leaves town, but we've heard that said many times before, and then all of a sudden the loser leaves town.
Right.
And I think Frank Mir has a great history with the UFC. He's been there for a long time. He's been a champion. He's one of the guys, and I don't know that he'll get a deal after he retires to stay with the promotion or what. But he's a guy that he at least will be treated with respect. I don't think Overeem ever was really embraced by the UFC. I think they always looked at him a little skeptically, and of course he went out and beat up Brock Lesnar, and so he had to propel forward. But look what he's done since then. And if he goes out there this time and does what he's done the last two fights, I don't know. Where does he belong? Really.
I feel like they belong to the right division in terms of having this kind of pressure, because UFC really doesn't want to lose either guy when you really think about the dearth of the heavyweight division. It's been that way for a while, and these are two of the guys who are the bigger names in that division as well. I'm sure that it would hurt to cut either one of those guys just directly from losing this fight. Now, if you really look at it, I would say that Frank Mir is probably the one who's under the bigger amount of pressure here, because I think he's only had a couple of fights outside of the octagon. It was like just early in his career. It's like his 22nd or 23rd fight, all with the UFC. So he's been a staple with the UFC for that long, but to lose 4 in a row, it becomes that much harder to justify keeping him around, especially if he were to lose very emphatically, very quickly, or it looks like he's getting knocked out again, or it's just he just doesn't have it. So to me, I feel like he needs to have a good showing. I feel like a lot of people, Overeem showed his offense in those last couple of fights. He should have won them both. So that his losses are a little different, I feel like, than Frank Mir's at this point. So if Mir were to get beat up pretty good in this one, I feel like the UFC is going to have a tough decision on him. It'd be hard for them to justify, even with his name and everything else, to keep him around.
I'll go halfway with you guys, which is to say, I think that the perfect outcome, someone has to lose, of course.
Sure.
But the perfect outcome...
Well, there could be a draw.
Could be a draw. Yeah. Oh, God, kill us. Well, assuming that is not the worst fight in the world, someone has to lose, right? So here's what I think UFC wants. I think they want an outcome where they can justify keeping both guys. Sure, ex-fighter lost, but damn, did he not go out there and just give it what he got? He has still got something left. Maybe the judges rob him or something. That's what they want. But the reality is, if someone goes in there and just gets bludgeoned, I think they are going to get cut. They're expensive. Frank Mir does not come cheap. Alistair Overeem does not come cheap. What are you going to do? You're going to put them on a Fight Pass card? That wouldn't be very financially prudent. And you couldn't really put them on a Fox Sports card, I don't think, given some circumstances. I think if one of those guys goes out there and looks bad, they need to start thinking about their option after fighting pretty quickly.
I would say, too, though, that there's probably at least a little bit. I agree with you 100% about, they want an outcome, I think, where they can keep both guys.
Yep.
But it would be hard for them to say, we're going to cut him, and they know for a fact that somebody's going to then swoop in and take these guys. Like you said, with Alistair Overeem, it could be Glory, it could be anybody. Frank Mir, he seems like a UFC loyalist. It doesn't seem as likely, but if he says he wants to continue to fight, somebody will pick him up. So they would be losing one of their, somebody with some name power and a former champion in that situation. So I don't think the UFC would want to basically lose a guy and then have him picked up by another organization.
Mir, though, both guys have suffered a number of knockouts in their time.
True.
But Mir's a family guy. I bet that if they, and I'm sure they do have genuine concern for guys who've had a lot of KOs. They could go to him and they could say, listen, you need to start thinking about your health here in a serious way. So to me, obviously we'll see what happens, but I don't see how someone looks bad and hangs around.
Yeah, I'm sort of where you were. What your last point was, that I feel like it would be more of a compassion move with Mir if he goes out. If the fight happens the way these guys' fights often happen, Overeem will be devastating for the first 2.5 minutes of the fight. And Mir has had some times where he couldn't withstand that. But if he can withstand that, then Overeem's vulnerability suddenly, comes on. But if Mir gets blasted, I could see someone from the UFC, Dana White or someone else, coming over and saying, look, we just think your time might be gone here. I don't think they're going to just cut him unceremoniously. I think that it'll just be more of a compassionate move. Whereas I don't think that Overeem has earned that with the UFC promotion. I think if he goes out there and looks crappy again and just can't keep bringing it,
it's back to the yacht in Thailand. Swimming in the
That's
water.
right.
yeah.
Barring any crazy knockouts, though, I'm calling BS on anyone leaving because, look, this is Frank Mir going into a fight on a 3-fight losing streak. Overeem would be on a 3-fight losing streak. Dan Hardy got a 5th crack while being on a 4-fight losing streak. They need guys with name value at heavyweight, unless it's something that's really one-sided. I don't think this is the last time we see either guy. But let me ask you one more thing about this fight. Alistair Overeem came into the UFC with a lot of buzz. He was expensive, as you mentioned, and he killed, essentially, their top pay-per-view draw.
Golden goose.
And they couldn't capitalize on that. If he loses this fight, if it is some kind of crazy knockout and they are forced to cut him, is that one of the biggest busts in UFC history? Because not only did he go on a 3-fight losing streak and lose badly, get knocked out, all that stuff, but he also, in the process, knocked off Brock Lesnar, so they couldn't build off of that win.
Yeah, you're trying to think about big-time MMA or UFC bust. Boy, Alistair Overeem, if it goes as you say, he's in that conversation. I mean, you look at somebody like Kimbo Slice, and Kimbo Slice washed out of UFC, but it was almost like, one of these feel-good stories, like, oh, this guy from the streets made it,
And they got what they needed.
And they milked that. That was the highest rated. You go back and watch Ultimate Fighter 10. Those are the worst fights in the history of the show, and they had the best ratings.
Right.
It's the craziest thing. So they got what they wanted out of Kimbo Slice. That was great. But guys who just they couldn't seem to get it together. I don't have the. I'm blanking here on the short list, but just sort of thinking naturally about it. Also, if he has another issue with. God forbid, some sort of performance-enhancing drug. He's being tested in New Jersey. They're not particularly lax by commission standards, so let's keep our eyes open for that. That would be, not only unceremonious, that would be sort of ignoble at that point.
All right, there are obviously a lot of other things going on in the world of MMA outside of UFC 169. Let's touch on some of them. This Julianna Pena situation is very unfortunate because the knee injury that she suffered was incredibly gruesome. Her coach, Rick Little, telling me that is one of the worst he's ever seen in sports, period. And Dana White saying she's going to be out for 1.5 to 2 years. Who knows what kind of athlete she'll be when she comes back. Some differing, stories as to what exactly happened. But, Jeff, how do you feel about Dana saying and, publicly and kind of mentioning on Twitter, someone campaigning for this for her to leave her gym, the gym that made her into the fighter that she is today? I mean, do you have any problem with that? Is that Dana's place? Is he just looking out for the best interest of his fighter? And if that really did happen to her, I mean, that is a very, very disgusting thing, as he put it. I mean, someone assaulting one of their own, I mean, it's a horrible thing, but should he be doing that kind of thing?
Well, if what he says happened is what really happened, then, as far as I'm concerned, all bets are off. But
right.
Bottom line, Dana White is going to say what Dana White wants to say, and I don't know that I'm not sure there's really much we can say that really
Sure.
says that this is good or bad or whatever. It's just he is who he is. He's going to say what he says, and I think we all have to take all of that with a grain of salt because he's a promoter, and that's bottom line. He's not a commentator, so I wouldn't say I think it would be more irresponsible if someone in the press were to just go out and run with the story without really knowing the facts. This is what he does. He shoots from the hip. A lot of stuff we hear come out of his mouth, is stuff that we always have to kind of weigh. What's really behind this? Does he have some sort of beef with this camp, or is there something else going on? So I mean, I'm just going to sort of take a pass on that one. I don't really think that we can evaluate what he said on the face of it.
I do feel like that too. Yesterday in the scrum, I remember I think it was you who asked him, you gave the version of what you were told by the coach, and he said, the truth is probably lies somewhere in the middle. That's probably the closest we're going to get to it. I don't really know. If she was attacked, that's really crazy by somebody in the gym, and to use that word attacked is crazy. And in that case, if he's 100% believing that, like you said, all bets are off. it's well within his right, I would say, to be like, you should leave that gym, but you shouldn't be in a place. You, as our TUF 18 winner, you shouldn't be.
Sure, it is in
you
his
shouldn't
best
be.
interest
Yeah, it's not in your
to
best. You know, so in that situation, sure, he should be doing that. But ultimately, let's not forget the Sikh Jitsu. They've got some good fighters over there. Another TUF winner in Michael Chiesa and Sam Cecilia, and you know, they've got some guys over there who are competing in the UFC. So it's a little weird when you hear the boss basically point out a gym where there's actually, you know, multiple people over there who work within your organization.
My attitude is you shouldn't be proven right after the fact if you can at all avoid it. I don't know what happened, right? I mean, maybe she was attacked. I've certainly seen scenarios with my own eyes in gyms where, in jiu-jitsu or MMA, where women were getting the best of guys, and the guys lose their mind, and they go way too far, and they break rules. Happened to my wife in jiu-jitsu. She got her arm broken as a consequence. Took her guys back, and he rammed her elbow and snapped it. So that happens. You know, attack may actually be the correct word, but dude, what you say matters. What you say in this life, it matters. And you're talking about a guy's business. This is how he pays his mortgage. This is how he makes a living. This is his life. Would you not find it prudent to figure out what happened first before you going on Twitter and you start tagging people and killing them? How many followers on Twitter does he have? 8 billion, Dana White? He's got
like 2.5 million.
He's got more followers than I could pay for, literally.
Have you tried?
No comment. But the reality is, man, like, if you're going to say stuff like that, I'm not saying he's wrong. I have no idea if he's wrong. But I found it a little like, really? That he only talked to Julianna Pena, and of course she's going to have her perspective. But
But she was hysterical and crying too.
Right.
So, you know,
it's incumbent upon you to talk to other people around there, not to do your journalistic due diligence, but if you're going to murder someone in public like that, I mean, you got to know. You have to know that what you're saying is unbridled truth.
What about what he said about, you know, it's time that some of these fighters go the boxing route where they build camps around them and they're not just another person in the gym? Can't someone like Julianna Pena really do that?
No. These fighters get together. Why is American Top Team like American Top Team? Because you can share training partners and coaches at a minimal expense. Like, oh yes, should fighters have camps like Canelo? Well, okay, they should have Canelo money. So problem solved. You want boxing camps? Give them boxing money. And of course, MMA guys make more than people think. Certainly UFC people, UFC fighters. I'm not saying boxing guys make more, but the high end of boxing, you want to listen. If a fighter in the UFC is making $6 million, they should have a camp just like what Dana White is saying. But if you're only making 20 and 20, how on earth are you going to afford that? It's literally not possible.
This is also a self-serving statement, because it would help Dana White avoid that scenario where he's got GSP and Rory McDonald training together, so they're not going to fight, or Daniel Cormier and Cain Velasquez. If it's every man for himself and every woman for herself, then you don't have to worry about all that stuff. And so it's self-serving, because there are so many times where there's a fight that he would like to have made that just doesn't happen because these are training partners. But I think there's something good about the way MMA operates in terms of training camps and teams and people working with each other. I think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think there's a lot of things in the sport that can change that would be good to change. I don't think that's one of the things that needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Luke was saying. I mean, the bottom line is, you know, these people seek each other out essentially to make each other better. And, you know, clearly she was in a situation at that gym prior to this happening where she felt she was in the best situation and it had been fine for her. So I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things. It's not realistic. It's not realistic to say that you're going to be the person people come that you bring in people. Nobody knew who she was six months ago. You know, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen for people like her. It's probably not going to happen to the higher people, you know, the bigger people in UFC at this point. It's just, you know, there isn't that kind of money like we're talking about. It's not boxing money. Everybody can't do that.
George St. Pierre does this. George St. Pierre would fly in for jiu-jitsu guys. He would fly in Ryan Hall. He would fly in Gary Tonin. He would put them up and pay them.
Right.
Who can afford to fly in jiu-jitsu black belts internationally, house them, pay them on top of paying a strength and conditioning coach, a nutritionist or dietitian, and then everybody else, your wrestling coach. Just the math isn't there.
Brock Lesnar did.
Brock Lesnar did.
I don't even think John Jones does something like that. I mean, you see all these guys, guys get injured. Dominic Cruz, someone bumped into him. That's just the way the sport is. Guys train, or girls train, with teams, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Guys, let's move along to another interesting topic. Roy Nelson, earlier this week.
He's so great.
Yes, Roy Nelson. Discuss. He applied for the new executive director position over at the Nevada Athletic Commission. Dana White obviously not very pleased to hear this news. Would you support the idea? I mean, maybe one could say on the surface that he's not qualified, but who is more qualified than a fighter who has fought in Nevada before to do this job?
I mean, dude, you want to talk? The audio didn't get released. I actually heard the audio of Dana White calling Roy Nelson a moron. It is so funny.
Why isn't it released?
I don't know, because it was on video and there was a whole thing about it. It was embargoed. But the point being is, I heard the audio and you can hear, the frustration in Dana's voice is so palpable. I literally had to put pause on my iTunes so I could guffaw laughing. It's hysterical. Listen, man. I mean, if Roy Nelson, had a dying wish that he wanted to be commissioner for a day, okay. You let him do that. But dude, let's live in the real world here. Like Keith Kaiser, I don't think he's a particularly honest person as a bureaucrat. That's my opinion. But he's a lawyer, and he understands regulatory frameworks and how to deal with sensitive, complicated issues of law. You don't have to be a lawyer by trade to do that job, but certainly it is beneficial, right? A fighter understands, a lot of things about the fight game, but his real specialty, typically speaking, with some exception, is kimuras and jabs and cutting weight. Not in his particular case, but you understand what I'm saying. That is their particular area of expertise. The area of expertise that relates to the ins and outs of being the head of the commission, or at least the executive director anyway, is a completely separate set of responsibilities. They don't overlap in any way except, do you speak English? That is it.
Do you think this is just a publicity stunt, or he actually really wants to do this?
Oh, I'm sure. I think he would probably love to do it, and more power to him. I mean, it's great that he wants to do it. We all have, things we like to do and dreams. And when I'm with Luke on this, I don't think that he's the guy for this job. I think that you need a bureaucrat to be a bureaucrat. You need that. But what I'm interested in is, first of all, I was thinking, okay, so what could be more frustrating for Dana White than having Roy Nelson be the commissioner, and that got me thinking. Okay, so imagine what these guys. The UFC is not just sitting there waiting for them to name a commissioner.
Right.
They've got to be working behind the scenes, trying to angle something. And so in the 8 years, was it 8 years that Kaiser was?
Yes.
Yeah. In the 8 years that Kaiser's been there, MMA has become huge, and so I'm thinking the next guy that's going to be in there is going to be somebody who's probably even more sort of ingrained in the MMA world and is going to understand things better. And I think that in itself might be a good thing, but it would also be sort of fun if it was someone that you just imagine the last thing when the back and forth. Dana's head lies on the pillow at night and he closes his eyes, and what is that picture in his mind of who that guy is he's got to talk to it the next day about some regulation, or who's going to be reffing or who's going to be judging.
Oh, Chuck, come on. Roy checking the weights at the weigh-ins in some kind of tracksuit and the hair. Dana would love it.
I would love it.
Oh, it'd be awesome.
It's one of those things. We underestimate his chin in this situation. If anybody was taking up the chin, it was Keith Kaiser for a long time from Dana White. I almost feel like that's the strength for him. As he just says, I've got a strong chin. He can prove it with the tape. Get in that seat. No, but seriously, it's one of those situations where I can never take him seriously, to be completely honest. Every time he does something, I'm never sure if he's being serious with it or if it's just Roy Nelson being Roy Nelson, because he has done that in the past. He's been a funny guy. I honestly never took it too seriously until he made mention that he wanted some support maybe from Dana White and that situation. So honestly, I can't even imagine what the Nevada Athletic Commission would be like with him in it.
I want to read the application.
Oh yeah.
Was there any like handwritten statements I had to go into? I was dying to read
I asked
this.
his wife actually, and she said there was no application. He just sent in a resume, and then I asked her, "Can I see the resume? Because what is on his resume? Fighter, IFL, heavyweight champ. Like, what do you put on that thing?
78 points in Madden football.
Exactly. What do you put on that thing to show them that you are a qualified candidate? So we'll see how this goes. I'm guessing Roy Nelson will not get the job.
He won't. But one quick thing, I think why Dana White is sensitive about it, I do think Dana White has been trying to repair his relationship, believe it or not, with some of the members of the Nevada Commission.
Sure.
And he even said that whole thing with Tito Ortiz, the bad blood thing, he's like, it never repaired from that. And I think he's probably, he hears Roy Nelson, one of his fighters, it's an independent contractor, and he can't control what these guys do at the end of the day, but he's probably just like, Christ almighty, yeah. I'm trying to make things right, and you're ruining it. I can see why he was like, well, if you have to hear the audio.
It feels like Roy Nelson is like that older son is just unruly, and he can never do anything. He can never punish him enough.
He's the dude from Lebowski, man.
But yet, when he was a free agent coming off a loss, they were very quick to support him and sign him right away. So there's a love-hate relationship there. We're running out of time, but I quickly want to get your take on the announcement that the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, Chael Sonnen, Vanderlei Silva, Chael Sonnen, by the way, who is essentially the face of the UFC on Fox right now, will air exclusively here in the United States and North America on Fight Pass. And not only that, when this announcement was made, oh, by the way, there was a big brawl that day. And, they talked about it as a huge brawl, it was the worst brawl. On the same day.
Within like hours.
It was within hours. So what's your take on this? A, to put that show on Fight Pass when they're airing Tough Nations now, Canada versus Australia here in the U.S. Fox Sports 1. Why wouldn't you have Chael Sonnen on Fox Sports 1? And B, the whole thing. I mean,
well, they want to sell the Fight Pass, and
sure.
I don't think that the TUF Brazil was going to sell the Fight Pass, but having Chael Sonnen on there is enough. And Chael being the ultimate promoter, yes. That he is aware of this and thinks, okay, well, what can I do? Well, he just decides he's going to start something with Vanderlei Silva. This is something we've seen. We've all seen this before. This is not new. This is like, when we were kids watching Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam. This is like Chael Sonnen just saying, baiting him, and of course Yosemite Silva just goes after him and they get into a fight. This is promotion, right? This is the opposite of promotional. This is promotional practice.
Yeah.
This is
it depends on terms.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what he wants to do. He wants it's just like, how are we going to sell this Fight Pass? Well, we'll sell it by giving people Chael Sonnen, and that's what maybe some people will buy it, and then if by the time Chael Sonnen is no longer on there and this whole show is done, maybe people will have been hooked.
My only problem with it is now Dana White himself won't see it because he doesn't really look at the internet. He doesn't.
True.
So it's sort of the situation. So he's not even going to get to see
How
his
unfortunate.
guys. Yeah.
He can't log in because he doesn't read. I don't mean to cut you off, but like my attitude about it is, I think it's a genius move. I think it's the right move. Yeah, I like the move. Was it going to air here? People don't want to read subtitles, especially MMA fans. Come on, let's be real. The other thing though, it's about changing the pattern of Fight Pass use. It's not just selling it, right? Because people are going to use it to go see the fight nights, and when they figure out how to get the database figured out and up and running, that too. But if you have a weekly show going on there, it gets you to go back and watch all the time on a much more consistent basis and for other things. You don't sort of think cognitively anymore, hey, I go there to watch fights. You go there to watch drama and reality and explore the universe generally. So I think it's about getting them to not just buy it, but then explore it and adopt it as much more a key part of their UFC fan experience.
Wait, you watch reality?
I do not.
He does.
You're with me.
I read books.
He does.
And wrestling.
And pro wrestling.
Speaking of which,
oh God, please kill me. If there's a gun, I will eat a bullet in front of this camera.
How excited are you about the prospect of one CM Punk, the best in the world, the former WWE heavyweight champion, crossing over to mixed martial arts?
I will make an admission to you.
Yes.
I watched your interview with him.
You did?
Yes.
And you enjoyed it?
First of all, the interview was great.
Thank you.
You guys have a clear rapport, I should say. He seems like a very thoughtful guy. He's hugely successful. I'd like to train with him if I ever get the opportunity. I mean that. He seems like an awesome guy. I mean in every way. Pro wrestling is horrible.
But that's not the question. Do you think that it would
You had to say it.
You would watch it? If he went into the UFC right now.
Yeah, but Ario, like I watched, Paulo Miao versus
You can't deny that it would be
Rafa
big
Mendes
news.
on
It would
YouTube.
be big news, right?
Oh, I mean, dude, like I see the traffic every
Right.
day.
Of course.
People are all over this news.
Right.
It would be huge. It would be huge. I don't know how good he'd be, but yeah, he'd be good. He seems like an awesome guy. I just think pro wrestling is stupid. That's all I want to get everyone to understand.
I'm actually offended right now.
Oh, I don't mean that for real.
Okay, one quick last thing. I didn't tell you guys I was going to do this, but I'm springing it upon you right now. Pat Barry announced that he is leaving mixed martial arts. Who knows if he'll fight again? It sounds like he will. Quickly, down the line, your favorite Pat Barry moment.
Got to be the Czech Congo fight. He lost it. No.
Thinking of loss?
Well, he lost it, but it just exemplifies everything that was Pat Barry. It was guns a-blazing, and whoever wins wins. But this is how I fight. And he always fought through fear. He was always afraid and always stepped up to it. And for a guy who had basically a 500 record in MMA, that's about as good as you're going to get with a 500 record.
Jeff?
Well, if you had gone to me first, I would have said the same thing. I think the Congo moment was just an amazing moment because he just took defeat from the jaws of victory. But speaking of defeat, I think I'm not sure if it was his last fight, but there was one of his last fights when he lost. During the the moment when they're raising the arm of the winner, they had a close up of him, and he just had this look of just absolute anger. Like it's almost like if there were another round to be fought after he just lost, he would have been indestructible. And I really liked that. I mean, I liked seeing him because he's always this kind of smiling, goofing around kind of guy. But there was this one moment where he looked like he was just so pissed off that this had just happened to him.
Mine would be when he was trying to figure out the time zone difference between the United States and Australia, and he couldn't figure it out. It was really puzzling him. That's
an obscure moment.
I would have to go with that exact same one. I was sitting there in Pittsburgh that night, and it was just.
You were there?
Yeah, I was there. I was sitting right there, and just the crowd, the way that went down, it looks like he's going to win. He's going in for the kill, and then he takes that right hand, and he goes down himself and just folds over on himself. It was still one of those things you couldn't believe your eyes had happened. I know it wasn't probably his favorite moment in the fight game, but that's definitely one of those memorable fights for me.
Honorable mention when he beat Anthony Hardonk.
Sure.
He had no money. He was eating rice with ketchup, and he had $170,000, roughly 170 after that. And you look at his face, and it is the face of triumph after debilitating internal defeat. There's no way you can feel like a loser and then win that way and get that money and not like I'm the man triumphant, but like, oh my God, I am worthy of these things. I did it,
And if I just want to say that if anybody is watching this right now and there's closed captions, they should all be in capital letters.
That is true, like his tweets. But yes, I'll never forget that. Actually had the pleasure of interviewing him backstage after that win, and it became a big deal afterwards that he was essentially, living with nothing. Dana White walks up to him and says, congratulations, shakes his hand. He says, I'm never going to wash this hand. He was so happy that he got that win. He was, as you mentioned, eating just rice and ketchup. A couple other moments for you. To get that kind of, demeanor and those smiles out of Mirko Krokop prior to that fight at UFC 115. He lost the fight, but you remember the build-up to it. They were like the best buds.
It was a little too broy for me.
Yeah, but it was Pat Barry.
Yes.
It was
Yes,
Pat
it was.
Barry.
That's right.
And my favorite Pat Barry moment, though, is after he defeated the late Shane Del Rosario. And that post-fight interview that he had, if you recall, it was just a day after the horrible tragedy in Connecticut, and he talked about how he just wants to be home with Rose, his girlfriend, and he dedicated the win to those people. He was just such, and we're not talking about him like, he's leaving. I think that he'll still be involved in combat sports, but just such a great guy to talk to, so down to earth, and just one of those true great characters. Remember him celebrating Rose's win in Invicta in the corner. He was going nuts. Just a real down-to-earth guy, and I think MMA lost one of those good guys.
A lot of these fighters, when you talk to them, it's like pulling blood from stone.
Yeah.
It just is, that's fine. But Pat Barry would just give you everything. He would give you...
So honest.
He would give you his weirdness. He would give you his hilarious antics. He would give you all he had. And people who wear their heart on the sleeve like that, you have to admire that kind of... not literalist, but the nakedness of it,
Yeah.
So long, UFC. Hello, glory, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Who knows? We shall see. All right, guys, that does it for us. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the MMA Beat, a special UFC 169 edition. Of course, UFC 169 just hours away in Newark, New Jersey. 2 title fights on the line, and MMAfighting.com will have its usual great fight night coverage for you. And let's give a plug to Sports Illustrated, who should have some kind of coverage as well.
Really? I hope so.
Well, I mean, you're here. Might as well do it.
It'll be nubs.
For Luke, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Mixed Martial Arts Beat.